Everyone, we've got some nice tulips today. This is from one of Glenda's photos, one of my students. So what I've done is I've drawn out 1, 2, 3, 4 tulips, quite prominent. I've gone with guide marks to start with. That really helps to get them placed. And then I've popped these little tulips in at the back, but very loosely, because I'm just going to paint those in. And then I found where the stems are and popped in a couple of leaves. Colours wise, I've got Gamboge yellow, alizarin crimson with a touch of rose, intense blue, but any blue will do, sap green and violet with a touch of rose in there, or alizarin crimson, just to make it a little bit more ready. So I'm not going to use any masking fluid today. I'm going to pop the water on and then I'll come back. Okay, so I've popped water all the way around these 4 flower heads, so they're all still dry, but everywhere else. Try to get plenty of water on so you get plenty of time. It's quite nice to have it really nice and fluid. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the yellow on. So this is your Gamboge yellow. And I want to pop it where the tulips are in the distance. And I also want to pop it where, or somewhere the green is, so you get some lighter areas of green. Now if you haven't got quite into all your lines, don't worry, you can come in now with a little bit of paint a bit closer, so you get those neater edges. You don't need to get this yellow everywhere. Just in places. I'm just trying to focus on getting it into the edges of the tulip. I know flowers aren't everybody's cup of tea, but it is spring and they are really useful to do for practice on lots of doing things like perspective. So I'm not trying to get absolutely everywhere, but I'm dabbing this colour in. I'm going to brush a little bit of a rinse. I'm going to dab it off on the kitchen towel. Make sure it's nice and clean and dry. Then I'm going to come into the red mix. So it's quite fluid up here, but I want to get those loose tulips starting to form in here. So I don't mind that it's going to flow, just going to paint a little bit in that could be these loose tulips. Should be nice and bold. You can have a few dashes of this colour here and there. Tonally having little bits in this green area will work really nicely as shadow. So it seems a strange thing to do at the minute, but it will really work. A few bits. Don't worry that it's flowing loads, it will still work absolutely fine. And then I'm coming into the green. I'll start to paint that on. So I'm looking where these leaves are going to be. As you're popping this on, just make sure you're not going to have halos of yellow around your tulip. So you want to be really focusing on where you're popping this green in to make sure you're losing those halos. It's very easy to end up with a glow of yellow around something, and we don't want that. So I've got a bit coming in here. And give my brush a bit of a rinse. Right, I've got a bit of a puddle just happening up here, and although I like what it's doing, I don't want it to form too much of a puddle. So what I'm doing is, with a clean dry brush, just lifting some of it out. It'll still carry on flowing once I've got rid of that puddle. Just make it easier to dry. Okay, and rinse the brush out. I'm going to dab into the intense blue and just stroke that through the green area to start with. Again, this is adding a little bit of shadow and a bit more detail. We know that intense blue has a tendency to shoot. It will work quite nicely at this point. Get a few little bits. Those darker areas, and you can come in pop a few bits on this outer bit as well. Just think balance all the time, so you need to think where you're popping these colours. And pop a little bit in here. And then a little bit down here. So we're not doing the table as such. I'm just doing a little pattern. Then at this stage I want a little bit of this violet mixing, but not a huge amount, so I'm just going to pop in a few bits where it's a bit darker. Remember, if you get it close to a flower, it always helps shoot the flower forward. So I'm going to dab odd bits in. Right, I've got a strange thing happening with this petal here. Now I've spotted it, I'll rectify it with this violet. So I've got a better shape there. I've got a bit of a halo of yellow here, so we're going to add a little bit of violet along here, just to break that halo up. And then just make sure you take a little bit of that violet in places there. The last thing I've got is just a touch of cobalt turquoise, which is left from last week, and I hate wasting paint, so I'm just going to pop a few little bits of this in. It's not essential, so don't feel that you've got to do it. Any turquoise or any cerulean that you've got, if you want to add a little bit, you can. It's just going to give it a little bit of a pop. You probably think it doesn't need any more of a pop at the minute, but it'll work really nicely. a few bits in through. So again, I'm just thinking balance all the time, balance. It's quite a lot of bright colour here, but we're thinking balance. So you've got time for a last sort of check if you've missed any areas. I quite like what I've done there, even though it's not reflective of the picture exactly. So it's just time to check those corners really. Make sure you haven't got anything that looks too sharp. Just round those off a little bit. I'm quite happy with that. If it's not flowing very well, this is the point that you could move it a little bit. I'm quite happy because mine's quite wet that it's flowed quite nicely anyway. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so what I'm doing now that's dried is to come on with a number 6 and some water, and I'm popping in the stems. So what I'm doing is lifting out. So you're just working the surface with a little bit of water, number 6, and then dabbing it with a bit of kitchen towel. You'll see that I've started to lift the stems and a few highlights on some of the leaves. So I'll do another little bit down here just to pull out a highlight on a leaf. So plenty of water, agitate the surface and then dab off. You can see that. And you're going to do that for all the stems and a few of the highlights on the leaves. Okay, then I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so what I've done now is into my intense blue I've taken some gamboge. So I've got a very nice fresh spring green. It's actually slightly brighter than the sap green but very much lighter than the sap green. I don't think it comes across on the camera very well. I'm going to use that now to start to paint in some of the leaves. So I'm going to use a combination of a number 6 and a number 10, and I'm going to try to go straight on to dry. So we'll start with a few of these littler ones at the back. Get into a nice edge. You can always add a few extra ones in if you want as well. So we've lifted out a highlight of a leaf. I can just come in now and paint to that edge. Tonally, everything that we've done underneath should stand through as the shadow on the leaf, so you shouldn't need to place any colour for shadow. Use whichever brush you're most comfortable with, so you can either use a 6 or a 10. Come in behind this stem over this side. So it gives you an opportunity to define these stems a little bit more as well. I'm hoping we don't need to do too much more to each of these stems. I want to keep them lighter. And it's just a case of painting these in nice and carefully. Okay, I'll do a few and then I'll pop the camera back on. Okay, so I've popped quite a few in. I've actually popped in a few that I've made up as well. The thing is that you really need this to balance quite well now. And if you're not careful and you follow the picture too much, it won't have that sense of flow. So I've popped in a couple of extra ones down here at the bottom. And then that means that it doesn't feel top heavy. You can just keep coming over them. If they start to get a slight watermark, then just come over them, because we've gone on to dry with a bit more paint. Don't be afraid to overlap a few. So this is all still just this green mix going on to dry and popping in a few. Okay, I'm going to dry that off and then I'm going to come in with a little bit darker. Okay, so we're at that point now where we need a little bit of something darker in, just to help to set the depth in here. So I'm going to do that using that violet mix that we've got, and I'm just going to come in just in a few places. So the first one being around this stem, because it's nice and dark. So I'm coming on either side of this stem. And I'm creating an outline. Then I'm going to rinse my brush, and with a dab of water I'm going to fill in that section with just a little bit of water, so there's still a little bit of light coming through, but then you've got that sense of depth there. I'm going to do this a few times. Sometimes I'll just fill in a little bit of colour. So I'm just looking at the picture and I'm pulling out sections that are darker. So there's a little bit here. And again I'm going to come along this stem. So that is one of those ones where I'm going to outline and then fill in with a little bit of water. So there and there, rinse my brush out, dab off a bit of the water, just dab a little bit in that centre. I need to do something here with this stem. I really like the colour in there, but the definition's not great, so I'm just going to bring this down. It's one of those ones where you like the bit of colour but you've got to lose it to give that definition. I'm going to bring a little bit in this side. Rinse my brush off, just dab in that. Still got that light there. Okay, just extend that a little bit there. I'm going to bring a little bit in towards the bottom. A little bit of violet there. A little bit in there. I'll bring a little bit in here as well. You've got to have this little bit in the bottom for it to have that sense of depth. I'm going to bring in a little line just here as well. like a little triangle happening there as well. A little bit overlapping there. A little bit just down this stem here. I'm going to rinse my brush and then dab in with a little bit of water. So here, into that centre, and then just softening this edge here, and soften just there in. Those little bits make all the difference to the depth and balance. Right, with this violet I'm going to come in and just give an indication just here of that tulip. So it's not quite as dark. Just going to give an indication that there's those tulips in the background. Give them a bit more definition. And then again, damp brush, just soften that in. So you can have quite a lot of water into that section. You want an indication of a line, but not too much definition. So I'm bringing that round over the edge of my leaves. And then I'm going to check that my brush is nice and clean, slightly damp. I've dabbed up on the kitchen towel. I'm going to bring a little bit of water up there and up there. So that's just giving the shape. I'll dry that off. Okay, so I've got my round number 10 and my round number 6. I've changed my water so it's nice and clean. Everything's dry on here, and we're going to start to work into each of the petals. So I want to keep these nice and light, and I'm going to work petal by petal. Where there's a fold, we're going to do one side of the fold, let it dry, and then work on the other side. So with your round number 10, you can come on with the water, and you can do a couple of petals at the same time and get a bit of a petal production line. A little bit of water. So I'm going to go for 3. If you want to have a practice first and do 1 or 2, and then you can build up to 3. It's just about how speedy you can be. And then I'm going to get some Gamboge yellow and drop that on. Now it doesn't matter if it doesn't go quite to the edge. In fact, it'll work really nicely if it doesn't go quite to the edge. I'm going to place it where you can see the yellow. Doesn't matter if it goes a little bit further. And then with the round number 6, I'm going to use that for my alizarin and rose mix. So when you pop the alizarin and rose mix on, start at the area that's closest to the bottom and let it flow. And you can see it's still moving. So we're using a number 6 so that it doesn't go too far. Keep the colour nice and thick. It's a good practice for you controlling your watercolour wet in wet. It's always going to flow further than you think. The more you practice doing this, the better you'll get at it. So that's those 3 petals done. So now I can move on to petals that are nowhere near those petals, so that those ones have a chance to dry. So I've wet 2 more petals. I'm going to come in with a bit of the gamboge. So I'm doing this edge here, this edge one. So I'm just going to pop a bit of gamboge on that and just let it run. And then I've got my round number 6 with my red colour on. I have avoided that centre stamen just to keep that white. If as you're going on you can do the curve to follow the line of the petal, that will work really nicely to give you a really nice edge. I'm going to try my best not to dry these because I want them to stay more vibrant. When you're drying these with a hairdryer, they do tend to dull a little bit. So I'm just going to work my way round. Okay, so I've done a few more, mainly the outside edge ones. When you've got to about third to a half done, I want you to start dropping a little bit of violet into some of them as well, just so you start to get that shadow feel. So I'm going to come on to this one at the back, just so I can show you what I mean. It's the same process, bit of water, and I'll come into this one as well here, bit of water. So I'm going to do 2 because I've got the 3 colours to drop in now. So dab into the yellow, so exactly the same process, bring in the yellow. Doesn't matter if you don't quite get to the edges, those little bits of white make all the difference to the light. And then this one. And then pick up your rose colour. You want to get right the way up to the edge so you're getting that definition on the petal in front and the definition of the petal at the side. This is going to take a bit of time, but it's worth it. And then into this one. So I'm not worrying about the stamens in this one at this point. Just get this colour on. And this is where we've got the edges overlapping. So I want to make sure that I've got a nice edge here. And an edge happening on this one as well. Then what I'm going to do is dab into a little bit of that violet mix. And I want you to pop a bit of shadow in. So not all of these have to have shadow, but a few of them do, just to hold this together. So if you squint at the picture, you'll see where it's darkest. You can just pop a little bit in. If you bring in the shadow onto the yellow, then you need to make sure it's a little bit waterier a mix, otherwise it'll look like a stripe. So at the minute I'm just bringing it in there and there. I do need to bring a tiny bit of this shadow colour into the yellow along this edge here. So I've watered it down a little bit. You can rinse your brush a lot of rose in that, and just soften that in a bit. You don't want it to look too harsh. You can always have a little bit of watered down mix and add a little bit in there just on the side of your palette. So I'm going to continue to do that till I've finished all these off. What I am doing is making sure that I leave that centre and that centre white for the time being. Okay, so I'm going to do those. Okay, so I've got all of those in and I've dried that really well. So just for a tiny bit more definition, so I've got a wet round number 10 ready, and I'm going to go into the red colour, and I'm just going to come on just in a few places. I'm going to curve with the petal, so I'm hitting where the red is and I'm focusing on the bigger tulips, and then with a little bit of water I'm softening in one side. Doesn't really matter which side you do, as long as you're softening one side. So I'm going to do the same here. If you can get the curve of the petal, that will really help get it to stand out. So I'm popping a few on. Come in and do a little bit on this outside edge here and here, and a little bit here and here, and then soften, soften, soften. So just water down one side, doesn't matter which side, as long as you hit one. You need to move quickly if you're doing them as many as I've done in one go, to make sure that you're hitting them all and softening in. That's just going to give it that little bit of a lift. I'm not even sure if you'll see it on the camera. I'm going to dry that off, and then we've just got the centres to do. Okay, so the stamens that we're adding in now, we're just using that violet mix, and we're just going to paint those on. Onto dry. So nice and thick. And then dry those off. Okay, so I've just come over these stamens a second time just to make sure they're nice and dark. And I think I've finished. Okay, so that one's all finished today. What I've done as well is I've just taken a tiny bit of violet shadow watered down just on those white central stamens, just so they're not too vibrant. Hope you've enjoyed that. See you next week. Bye.